I think that Latin America is all about cheap labor, all about cost saving. And the truth is that Latin America is much more than that, right? There is amazing talent and it's a very strategic market for not only global companies like Google, Meta, they have talent hubs in Latin America.
That's Leandro Cartelli, founder of Lana Talent, a firm dedicated to connecting businesses with exceptional Latin American talent while ensuring both skills alignment and cultural fit. With over 15 years of experience leading talent acquisition efforts at companies like Accenture and DeliveryHero, Leandro brings a wealth of knowledge in building scalable, data-driven recruiting strategies. I'm Germain, the founder and host of the Dear Human Resources podcast. In this episode, we are diving into the evolving world of talent acquisition. Leandro is going to talk about how talent acquisition can move from being a transactional process to becoming a true strategic business partner, and how data is reshaping recruitment, but also what trends HR leaders need to watch in today's fast-moving hiring landscape. Welcome to the show, Leandro.
Thank you for having me. Excited for our conversation today.
So you have led talent acquisition for some major global organizations. What were some of the biggest lessons you learned that shaped your approach today?
I've moved in different industries and different cultures, and I always try to differentiate what I've learned and how those things come together. So at Accenture, what really shaped me was the importance of having structure, metrics, governance, making sure that recruiter was fully aligned with business strategy, because we hired thousands of people a year across dozens of countries. So discipline in execution was really key. But then at DeliveryHero, German company, I actually led talent acquisition for their brand in Latin America, but also had a global role with them. It was the exact opposite. Everything was about speed, agility, adaptability. It was a high growth tech company. So priorities shifted constantly, and we had to adjust hiring strategies, sometimes week over week. And what I always say is that the combination of those things really taught me the secret to balancing structure and agility. Too much process, you lose speed, you lose understanding of the business and solving the actual needs on the ground. Too little structure, you lose quality. So it's really about balancing both. And that's what defines my approach today.
So what inspired you to launch Lana Talent, and what gap were you aiming to fill in the market?
What I saw, I started at Accenture early 2010s, and what I saw back then, and that's changing a lot today, is only big corporate businesses had access to the high level of quality recruiting and acquisition, and even to the talent in Latin America. And smaller businesses and startups were really unable to access that, right? And when you think about that, the fact that SMBs, startups, scale-ups also want that high-level enterprise quality recruiting, but sometimes don't have the expertise, the budget, or the resources for that. That's really what pushed me, because at the same time, I saw there is a huge pool of highly skilled talent in Latin America that was under-leveraged globally. And so that's really what led me to build Lana Talent. I wanted to connect that high expertise, sort of executive search rigor with a startup-friendly approach, better pricing, better access, in a mission to position the Latin American talent better as a global talent hub, and not just a cost-saving vision. And on top of all of that, bringing the value of cultural fit that we prioritize when we recruit in this corporate world to the startups, the smaller businesses that many times don't really know how to go about that, or the impact and the value that it has. And they don't have partners that help them with that. And so I wanted to also bring that to the table in our conversation, and as value that we could provide with Lana Talent.
So your company focuses on both skills alignment, like I said earlier, but also cultural fit. So how do you evaluate cultural fit in practice, especially when working across borders and sometimes some diverse teams?
there's three things to this. One is culture is not having ping pong tables or perks. It's about values and work stuff, right? And I think that's the first thing we all need to understand. The second is you can't really assess and understand the right cultural fit, or I would say sometimes cultural add, because cultural fit can sound like searching and recruiting people that are like me. That doesn't mean that we're finding the right person, right? The fact that they are similar to me doesn't mean they're the right cultural fit or cultural add. And so I believe there's an exercise before we can make the right hiring decision of understanding what our culture is all about. Are we high speed? Are we perfectionist? Do we value direct conversations, or are we soft in the way we communicate and try to ensure people feel comfortable, and maybe the fact that if we provide feedback very directly, they might not receive it constructively. And so there's a lot of nuances to that, right? And I think understanding what the company culture is all about, that's the first thing before we can actually assess if people are the right cultural fit. And then in terms of how to do that, right? We use structured interviews and scenario-based questions so that we look at how people, what does accountability mean for people and how accountable are they? How they communicate? Are they okay with ambiguity, or are they, very structured, right? And those are things that we need to understand first, what the company looks like in terms of their cultural style before we can go and assess. And so we use those structured interviews and assessments to ensure that the person is a good fit. And we also look at the candidate behavior through the process. Are they responsive? Are they curious? Do they answer the question in a very transparent way? All of those things are also tells in terms of the style of the person. And I think when we look at all of that, and we also provide tools and guidance to the clients in terms of what they should ask and what they need to look for and help them make a good decision, that's how we enable and ensure that we're actually looking for strong cultural fits.
So you've talked about talent acquisition evolving into becoming more of a true business partner. What does that mean in practical terms?
Traditionally, talent acquisition has always been seen as a transactional function. So basically, we get a requisition, we fill it, and that's it. But the real value is when we act as strategic advisors. This is not new. We've been talking about it in the industry for a long time. However, the fact that it's not new and we've been talking about it doesn't mean that it's changed. And so it really brings a question. We as an industry and we as a function, when we have conversations with the business, what are we asking, right? And how are we challenging the business? And so do we ask them if they need the role, if the profile they're looking for and the time they're looking for is realistically available in the market and actually what the business needs? What's the cost of waiting versus filling the role today? What's the cost and the trade-off between looking someone that's more junior but with potential versus someone that comes as a plug and play? And those are a lot of questions that I think we need to bring to the table. Sometimes it's a bit uncomfortable because leaders just come in with a JD or an idea, a job description and an idea, and they push for that. But we need to be able to have that conversation. It also means providing market intelligence. So, for example, if we have a business leader, or in our case, a client saying that they want to hire in Bogota, but we see the pool is not there, or too small or too expensive, and we might recommend another city, another country, we need to be able to provide that market intelligence and advice. And that's also how we position ourselves as a partner, which then influences and convinces the business to really listen to us, right? It's not the same that if I talk from intuition, that if I bring data and insights. And so we need to evolve the conversations and move from order takers to really consultants and advisors, and ensure the right hire that's tied to growth and outcomes and business objectives, not only in the short term, but also in the mid and the long term.
So you are big on data-driven recruitment, I understand. How can data help HR leaders make better hiring decisions beyond just filling roles quickly?
Data provides clarity versus perception versus gut feel. And so when we have a hiring manager or business say these are not good candidates, we can look at a lot of data like the funnel. We have throughout the process, the response rate, salary benchmark. And sometimes the issue is not that we don't have or we're not finding good candidates, but it's really around the compensation package not being aligned with the market or the messaging that we're using during the conversations. And so tracking metrics like conversion rates throughout each stage of the process, the time to hire and time to fill, the compensation alignment with the market, the sources from which candidates are coming from. Are we hunting them? Are they applying directly? Are they referrals? And what does that mean, not only during the process, but then after, right? So when we hire someone that's referred from another person in the company, do they stay longer, perform better? If we hire someone that we've hunted directly from certain industries or companies, do they grow fast or do they leave the company way too soon, and that impacts turnover? And so looking at all of that can lead to, when we're driving a process, in the middle of the process can really move the conversation from frustration to strategy. And so if we look at the data and we see that the challenge is candidates are not interested because the compensation is not the right one, well, we have data to back that up and discuss with our business leaders and hiring managers, do we need to change locations? Do we need to rethink the must-haves of the profile? Do we need to look for someone more junior? And so data enables us to replace that intuition with actual objective data-driven, for being redundant, insights. And so it really moves us to being more credible, more influential, and it allows us to make better decisions grounded in evidence, but not just opinions.
Can you share an example where a data-driven approach significantly improved recruitment outcomes for a particular client?
This was, I think, about 5-6 months ago. We work with a high-growth tech company here in Argentina. They have clients across the region in Latin America, but also the US. And they're growing super fast. And they had some issues during their sales process. And they were looking for a technical pre-sale sales professional. And what we found, we went out to the market because their product is highly technical. What we found is that we were not able to find in the market. There just wasn't people in the market with the deep technical expertise they required that came from sales. They had certain expertise, they do pre-sales, technical pre-sales, but not that deep expertise where they actually had to sit with CTOs or VPs of engineering, go into the code and explain how the solution and the product they had was solving for the challenges of their clients. And so we basically brought all of that in a report. We explained what the market looked like. And our recommendation was we actually need to find someone that was actually a technical person, a DevOps, that was interested in supporting a sales process, but we had to redesign the role to be more a consultant rather than a pre-sales role. And so we brought off data about the market, the profiles, the compensation. And with that, we decided to actually change the profile we were looking for. We had to adjust compensation. This meant investing more money in the role, but at a place where it had a massive impact for the business because they were just not converting the leads they had and the prospects they had to clients. And we did that work. They hired someone a few months ago. That person already closed a few deals, and they're seeing an improvement in their conversion from lead and prospect to actual clients. And so that was one of the biggest examples that we had recently where we took market data. We looked at not only the role design, but the compensation. And we were able to really provide strong advice to our client. And luckily, they made a good decision with positive impact to their business.
I understand the Latin American talent market is evolving fairly rapidly. What key trends do you see, Leandro, shaping the future of hiring in that region?
There's a couple. So nearshoring or offshoring continues to gain momentum. It depends and differs based on the country, but we see growing trends in hiring in Mexico, Colombia, Argentina, Brazil. We don't see the same speed of growth in some other places like Peru or Ecuador, for example. We do see strong momentum there. There is growth of between 10 to 15% annualized in offshoring. Second, we continue to see that despite some larger companies deciding they want to go back to the office, remote and global hiring is still here and it's still strong. Our data tells us that there's about 80% of roles that are remote. Latin America continues to be one of the top regions for that. There is definitely that cost advantage. So we continue to see that US businesses can save between 30 to 50% in their headcount cost. So basically in salaries as compared to local hires. And we're actually seeing a movement from those more transactional and lower and less senior roles to more senior and niche and highly specialized positions. So we're seeing a lot of hiring, not only in director roles on the one side, but also in high demand tech areas like AI, machine learning, cloud, security. So we're seeing huge growth, and we're seeing a lot of upskilling in the region and a lot of investment from governments to support that upskilling because demand is there. The last thing I would say is there is a lot of, I would say, change in regulation and digital infrastructure to support these trends. So countries like Brazil are investing a lot in digital infrastructure and championing remote work policies like digital nomad visas. So improving internet access across major cities, creating policies that support individuals working from pretty much anywhere. It's enabling the region to continue to grow. And so what we're basically seeing, I would say, is those are the key trends. I would say at a very high level, looking ahead, Latin America is really transitioning from cost center mindset, where what mattered was only cost or primarily cost, which still matters, but it is becoming a more strategic talent hub. And so we're seeing that with sustained cost quality, but also with accelerating skill in emerging technologies, in more senior talent, and the infrastructure in some of the major hubs like Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, Colombia, really stabilizing and enabling talent to work seamlessly with US businesses.
Do companies have misconceptions about hiring talent from Latin America?
Yeah, I think there's a couple, right? I think one, and the first one I was talking about cost. I think one that's very common is the fact that Latin America is all about cheap labor, all about cost saving. And the truth is that Latin America is much more than that, right? There is amazing talent, and it's a very strategic market for not only global companies. I've been at Accenture, at DeliveryHero, companies like Google, Meta, they have talent hubs in Latin America, right? And so it is a strategic hub of talent, and it's becoming more so for smaller businesses, for startups, for scale-ups. I think super positive, right? Because it enables a more balanced access to the best talent in the region. The second, I think there is a misconception around language barriers. English proficiency has been improving very fast across the region, and it continues to improve. Countries like Argentina, which is actually ranked as the one with the best English skills. I'm Argentinian myself. Of course, I have an accent and probably some opportunities, but I think I do pretty well. But that's because Argentina ranks first in terms of English skills, but then Mexico, Colombia. We're seeing the younger professionals and people coming out of university with strong bilingual skills and able to step into global roles very, very quickly, which is great. But that tends to be a bit of a misconception. Sometimes it's not even about their ability to communicate. It's just about their accents, and because they don't sound native. And the last one I would say is around attrition and turnover. Sometimes some companies worry about that because, of course, they don't know the culture, the region, and the sense that people are very far away, at least from a sort of physical standpoint. gives sometimes creates a worry of lack of loyalty or high turnover. In reality, when you find the right person that's connected to the purpose of the company, that's the right cultural fit, that's the right fit for the role, interested in what you're doing and the journey they're taking with you as a business, they stay for a long time. Latin American talent looks for companies where they can grow, where they can succeed, where they get opportunities to learn and feel connected with the purpose of the business. And so in that sense, they're actually, I always say there is a cultural, for in many cases, there's a strong cultural affinity between Latin America and the US. It's sometimes, for example, companies go to India, Philippines, Pakistan, some other countries that they have challenges first with that cultural fit, but then second with time zone. And that makes a huge difference. And so there's a misconception sometimes that in Latin America is the same challenge as in those regions, which is not the case. And so I think those are at least the biggest ones that I've seen, right? The first one, it's not only about cost. The second one, English skill being a barrier. And then the third one about commitment and loyalty and attrition, which is really not the case.
How do you maintain a human touch in recruitment while leveraging more technology and automation?
I love the question. And I think it's so relevant nowadays with the revolution we're seeing with AI. Talent acquisition is an industry that's adopting AI super quickly, really undergoing a huge transformation. I believe that it's about technology being an enabler, and it's amazing for efficiency, right? So it's helping us today for recruiting to automate hunting and sourcing, scheduling, even a first pass screening. So it does help. It even supports candidate experience many times, right? So it does help accelerate, it does help optimize, and it enables recruiters to do more with less. However, I would say technology doesn't close off, relationships do. Right? People don't want to accept an offer, at least not today. I don't know, in 5 or 10 years, but people don't want to accept an offer from an AI. And so the use of automation to handle repetitive work free recruiters time to focus on what matters, which is building trust, telling the story of the company, coaching candidates throughout the process, and really understanding their motivations and their cultural fit, as we discussed. I think that's how we manage to maintain that human touch. I think AI and technology needs to be there. It needs to enable us, support us, but the human conversation needs to be definitely part of that, building that rapport, building that relationship, having someone talk about what your growth opportunities are, and the person that's undergoing that process being able to connect with that really makes the difference between not only their experience but their intention to accept the offer, and then their long-term journey with the company. Someone that goes through a process and has a bad experience, they're 40-50% more likely to leave the company in the first 3 to 6 months. So that's huge, right? So you need that human touch in the process. I think we're all right now trying to figure out the right balance, but I don't think it's going away. I think in some cases there's been trials where companies have used AI and technology to put human touch aside, and we've seen that backfire. But we are still finding the right balance. I think it's all about recruiters being relationship builders and coaches and mentors throughout the process, and using the technology to optimize, to be more efficient, and mainly to support at least definitely all the transactional activities. Some higher value add for sure, but always with a human touch as part of that.
So, our podcast is Dear Human Resources. So, I want to finish with a question for HR professionals. If you could give one piece of advice to HR leaders, Leandro, those who are navigating today's competitive hiring landscape, what would that advice be?
I think my advice would be, as we discussed, we were talking about talent acquisition becoming more strategic than transactional. And I would say is treat talent acquisition like you treat product development. So basically build on data, iterate, all the time, design for the user experience, which is basically your candidate, and always align with business outcomes. I think it's not about chasing silver bullets. There's no silver bullet. There's no one single tool or perfect strategy. Instead, focusing on creating a function that's strategic, that's adaptable, that's based on evidence, that focuses on the experience of candidates, of business leaders, also in the experience of recruiters. I think that's what matters. And I think most importantly, remembering that best hires don't just fill a role, right? They can impact a business significantly. And I think keeping that mindset, understanding the value the function brings to the business can help us change the mindset, change the impact that we have, and really become that strategic function we're looking for. So I would definitely say that's my advice.
This was very informational, Leandro, and it was great having you on the show. Thank you very much for your participation.
Thank you for having me. It was great to be here.
Support for this show comes from Western Carolina University, a campus of the University of North Carolina system, with the technical assistance of Kelly Minnis.